In this video, I'm taking a look at the complicated ménage à trois between Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, and his brother Robert. It was one of the most juicy scandals in the 1960s and was exploited accordingly by the press. Marilyn Monroe is arguably one of the most beautiful women to ever grace the silver screen, and her fascination continues until today. Not only was she the quintessential movie star, she seemed to embody something beyond the iconic Hollywood glam of the 50s and 60s. There's something pure and ethereal about her, a beauty that even in her natural form, pre-plastic surgery and various makeup enhancements, still captivates people to this day. There's a girl next door type of unpretentious sweetness to her, a vulnerability that seems to shine through, and a kind disposition that makes her endearing. Her life story is as riveting as it is sad, because underneath all the bleached blonde sophistication and sex appeal was a fragile yet tough soul that had gone through great torment in order to get to where she thought she'd be happy. There are various documentaries and books about her life, some more sensationalized than others, but in essence they all agree on Marilyn's lifelong quest for an emotional safe haven and simply wanting to be loved for who she was. Her struggle to find romantic and emotional stability can be seen in her birth chart. To say she never found what she was looking for is an understatement, because not only did she not find a truly stable and healthy partnership, she was subjected to a lot of physical and emotional abuse, beginning in her childhood and continuing throughout her career, where she had to do certain favors for studio bosses or executives who took advantage of their powerful position. Looking at Marilyn's birth chart, the first thing that struck me was the T-square between Neptune in Leo, Saturn retrograde in Scorpio, and Jupiter conjunct the Moon in Aquarius. Her rising sign Leo speaks of a striking appearance and willful character that can often be combined with an air of luxury and glamour, especially with Neptune in her first house, representing great sexual magnetism as well as being drawn to a highly alluring self-representation. Neptune in Leo is, archetypally speaking, the best representation of a Hollywood goddess, because Neptune is really the planet of Hollywood, the entertainment and music industry in general. It's all about pretending to be something you're not, entrancing your audience and inspiring their fantasies. The first square is formed with Saturn retrograde in Scorpio in the 4th house. This is the house of the mother, family, past, childhood, home, and female family line. Saturn stands for stability, paternal role models, or the father figure. Furthermore, the ego's ability to cope with reality and rein in one's emotions. In retrograde, it indicates a lack of structure from the childhood home, the father, and her own way of coping, which was clearly not balanced. Saturn's placement in this house, and especially in Scorpio, hints at sexual abuse from the father or father figure. And indeed, her foster father molested her when she was 10. She tried to escape being put back into her abusive foster home by marrying at 16. Marilyn was never content with playing housewife and began modeling in earnest, and soon sought the limelight and divorce. Saturn in the 4th house not only reflects the tendencies within her childhood home, but the general conditions in her domestic life. When someone has such a difficult placement indicating lack of dependability or even mistreatment, it doesn't automatically mean that they'll only have such conditions during their whole life and there's nothing they can do about it. However, it does mean that the person finds it hard to consciously get away from that which they are subconsciously drawn to because it is so familiar. Marilyn never knew a stable home, having mostly grown up without her mentally unstable mother and with no biological father, and she struggled all her life to create a safe home for herself. Completing the T-square with Neptune, the sexual allure, and Saturn, the corrupted home, we see the Moon conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius. Aquarius is a highly rational, fixed air sign ruled by Saturn that symbolizes a great sense of social responsibility, justice, independent thought and originality, and the Moon therein speaks of one's own emotional needs and instinctive approach. Marilyn detested being smothered and dominated, and needed a lot of room to breathe. Jupiter in this sign amplifies this natural need and shows us that she was indeed a free spirit with a creative and independent mind through and through. The seventh house is the house of relationships, so she was very much attracted to intellectual partners as well as highly sensitive ones, since part of the house is occupied by Pisces, the sign of the artist and mystic. Under not so good circumstances, it can also be the sign of mental illness, addiction, and substance abuse. She probably would have been happiest in a non-conventional type of relationship instead of conforming to conservative ideas of marriage typical of her time. Marilyn was ambitious to the point of physical and emotional exhaustion. A moon in Aquarius person can be quite calculating and detach themselves from a situation so they can see the bigger picture, making it easier for them to leave complicated circumstances behind. In other words, she needed emotional nurturing but couldn't stand being in someone's all-consuming grip and would do everything in her power to escape it. She wanted safety plus freedom. An important indication for her struggle to find safety with men is Mars in the 8th house, trine Saturn, and in addition her Venus in Aries. Mars in the 8th house is a very typical placement for people who have experienced sexual or psychological abuse and have to be extremely aware of gaslighting or manipulation in relationships, as the 8th house is one of the most psychologically profound. Mars conjunct Uranus is a self-willed and independent person. Despite her ability to adapt to her partners and, at least temporarily, conform to their values and expectations, she was very hard to control, and coupled with Neptune in the 1st house, indicating difficulties with a clear self-identity, this can be a recipe for instability and frustration, because her inner life is so erratic, with past trauma resurfacing in various degrees of upset, and there is no clear inner compass because of that. She went to Sigmund Freud's daughter for psychotherapy, but examining Anna Freud's ideas will quickly reveal that this was the wrong direction for someone like Marilyn. If you study Marilyn's biography, you can see a few instances where she was extremely susceptible to other people's teachings and ideas to the point of regarding them as a kind of guru. Jupiter in Aquarius also indicates an openness to modern or unconventional ideas. With Neptune in the 1st house and Uranus in the 8th, there is not only a potential lack of grounding in one's own self, but also an element of unpredictability, and in Pisces, this can allude to psychological issues, sudden emotional outbursts or breakdowns. Venus in Aries enjoys romantic conquests and goes after what she wants, but has high romantic ideals. Having the Sun conjunct Mercury in Gemini in a supportive sextile with Neptune and Venus respectively won't help much with finding stability, because it will cloud Gemini's logical and intelligent yet emotionally detached nature, and therefore could make her get lost in the world of ideas and ideals, and Mercury, embodying the mind and thinking process, is being scorched by the Sun in a relatively close conjunction, meaning her ego could very well overshadow reason at times. The Gemini placement with Mercury in domicile shows a high degree of intelligence and interest in learning, which would have made it even harder for her to find someone who catered to her intellectual and romantic aspirations. Her intelligence was underestimated her whole life, but she really was quite smart, not by collecting degrees and throwing fancy words around, but instinctively gifted with a great sense of humor and a creative mind that loved challenges. Therefore, she wasn't content with playing the dumb yet likable floozy, though she did it brilliantly, and knowing full well that this was her only ticket to more serious roles. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be, although she impressed critics with her performance in The Misfits, her last finished movie, alongside Hollywood legend Clark Gable. Her grand trine in water signs speaks of a deeply emotional nature, which can be very hard to reconcile for someone with the Sun, Moon, and Mercury in air signs. It's not that air signs are incapable of empathy or compassion, quite the contrary. It's just that they aren't equipped to deal with highly demanding, intense feelings over a long period of time, because their nature wants to immediately detach from them in order to assess a situation logically and find rational explanations and solutions. Marilyn was very compassionate but deeply traumatized. With the North Node in the 12th house, the house of the subconscious and self-undoing, we see a great yet unfortunately unfulfilled desire for motherhood, as Cancer represents the mother archetype and the reflection of her painful past upon her self-sabotaging tendencies and deep psychosexual distress. Her own mother's emotional detachment due to mental illness and institutionalization is represented by the moon, Cancer's ruler, in emotionally distant Aquarius. The moon's air sign placement doesn't automatically mean that the mother was a cold person, just that there was some kind of distance between her and her child for whatever emotional, psychological, or physical reason. The solution for Marilyn's lifelong struggle to find emotional and physical safety with men who wouldn't exploit or undermine her would have been to go more towards the non-glamorous, to seek solace and stability in the simple life, something she kept attempting while constantly being drawn back into the vortex of fame and glamour and false appearances, and her desire to constantly prove herself to the world. John F. Kennedy also had Mars in his 8th house, an indicator of psychological or sexual issues, some form of abuse, and even sex addiction, along with the 8th house planets. This indicates a person with a great deal of inner drive and turmoil, a desire for control, possibly some sexual kinks, and a remarkable capacity for self-transformation. Venus among those 8th house planets in Gemini says he was attracted to intelligent women who were entertaining and interesting to talk to, who also wouldn't demand commitment. His sun is in Gemini like Marilyn's, so there was most definitely a basis on which he and Marilyn would communicate besides the physical attraction. Being of the same generation, his Neptune is also in Leo, but in the 10th house as opposed to her first. The 10th house is the house of the father, one's public image and career. His MC, the 10th house cusp, is in Cancer, the archetypal sign of the mother and the family. With Saturn in Cancer conjunct the MC, we see the clear presence of his father in the sign of the mother, symbolizing a highly elevated position of the father within the family dynasty. Plus, we have Pluto in Cancer too. This means that coming from a powerful family resulted in a career that carried on his family's legacy. The house of the family and homeland is the 4th, the cusp is Capricorn, the ruler Saturn is conjunct the MC, aka career. Couldn't be much more obvious. If he hadn't been president, he would have had a highly distinguished position within his family dynasty nonetheless. The moon in Virgo gives the impression of emotional discipline and repression, something that is to be expected from a man whose mother was likely a very disciplined woman herself, but was a powerful figure in her own right, as shown by the moon sextile Pluto in Cancer. The trine between the moon and Mars, Mercury and Jupiter in Taurus in the 8th house speaks of strong emotional repression as well as psychological issues resulting from that, because so much had to be put into the service of the expectations from society or the social structures within the family circle. To sum it up, this is a person whose inner drives, self-image, and will to succeed would always be dominated by his family's expectations and complicated psychological framework. John's brother Robert's axis of public and family life is exactly reversed, with Cancer in the 4th and Capricorn in the 10th house. In this chart, the moon or mother is present near the MC in a sign that represents the father, Capricorn. His Venus is in Capricorn, the complete antidote to femininity and luscious sexuality. Both moon and Venus in Capricorn can represent emotional austerity and materialism, and Jupiter's presence right on the MC clearly speaks of a huge thirst for power and prominence. This would have contributed to him repressing his emotions and developing a cutthroat attitude. Chiron in Aries in the 12th house, making a square to the Capricorn planets, speaks of an unfulfilled drive for self-expression and dominance, and possibly subconscious wounds to the ego such as an inferiority complex, maybe due to his mother's role. With Aries ruler Mars in Scorpio, we get a sexually driven, potentially devious plotter who could outwit people and use them for his own advancement. We also get someone who is attracted to partners who display these qualities in themselves. With the 7th house cusp in Scorpio plus Saturn and the Sun therein, he was definitely a very sexually motivated man with a considerable ego and a need for control, but an easily wounded ego as well, and not exactly an emotionally warm person. Saturn in Scorpio conjunct the Sun trine Pluto can also indicate power struggles with the father. He might have had ADHD or sleeping disorders or something along those lines, because Mercury is in detriment in Sagittarius and would have made it hard for him to stay focused and very prone to nervous disorders and a restless mind. But that is a minor problem compared to the huge red flag that is Chiron in the 12th house, square the Moon, Venus, and Jupiter in Capricorn, and the Capricorn planets making a sextile to the controlling Scorpio planets. In the worst case, we get an emotionally cold man with an inferiority complex who has a lot to prove and seeks to dominate his partners sexually and psychologically, and who is absolutely power hungry in his career, so much so that he'd always opt for his career advancement no matter what. Chiron in the 12th house square Pluto in the 3rd house can indicate power struggles with siblings too, and not being able to communicate one's needs. A composite chart can be made for 2 or more partners and is a great way to determine a relationship's nature and progress. It is read similarly to a birth chart, but with broader themes in mind instead of concrete personal characteristics. The Sun, Mars, and Saturn stand for the male, and the Moon and Venus for the female element. The Sun in Gemini is intellectually stimulating and entertaining, but opposite the Moon in Sagittarius, this relationship is definitely not committed, but more on the playful and fun side. The Ascendant and Saturn in Virgo means very emotionally controlled, even more so with the square to the Sun. Venus and Mercury in Taurus trine Saturn in Virgo means sharing ideas, material and sensual pleasure, but probably an inferiority complex or some kind of issue on JFK's side from the square between Saturn and the Sun. There was probably a lot of excitement in the bedroom, but with Chiron and Jupiter in Aries, there's also very high impulsivity and easily wounded egos, and with Mars in the 8th house, there is definitely a tendency towards violence of a psychological or sexual nature, though not necessarily overt. In short, absolutely not a stable, nurturing, or durable relationship, with a grand cross in mutable signs and Uranus in Pisces adding a huge element of instability, emotionally laden outbursts, and substance abuse may also have been involved. Ascendant Gemini and Descendant Sagittarius, that is a freedom-oriented, fun, entertaining, non-committal relationship with a strong sexual element as seen with Saturn in Scorpio trine Pluto and the North Node in Cancer, making a grand trine in water signs with the planets in Pisces. It seems that there was a lot of idealism involved, but Neptune opposite the Moon and Jupiter in Aquarius could be an element of manipulation or deception, and because the Aquarius planets are in the 8th house, it definitely has a sexual and psychological dimension. The physical attraction was high, but there's another difficult aspect. Pluto opposite Mars in the female versus male signs Cancer versus Capricorn, with Mars being ultra dominant in the ultra masculine sign, conflicting with the power of the female. On the flip side, this would have been a very interesting and exciting bedroom life. There was likely a lot of butting heads though, if not overtly then definitely on some level, when the veneer of fun and fascination started wearing off. Chiron in Aries trine Neptune in Leo can be interpreted as an element of shame. Chiron denotes an area of discomfort or insecurity, and in the 11th house it speaks of the public opinion or social circles. So in other words, a socially difficult relationship. Uranus in Pisces conjunct Mercury shows a propensity for sudden outbursts and drama, possibly also substance abuse, with Venus presence therein denoting pleasure from escapism and idealism, and a strong sexual element of domination that could have found violent expression in the worst case. I thought it would be interesting to not only get a general overview of the respective two-way relationships, but to also look at the composite chart for all three in order to illustrate the nature of their dynamic. This three-way relationships theme was all about powerful physical attraction, glamour, a dazzling appearance, playfulness, and again clearly non-commitment. The Leo ascendant, with Leo's ruler the Sun also representing the strong ego of the male partners, as well as the allure and fascination from Neptune, is making a trine to the Moon in Sagittarius, representing the woman who is free-spirited, independent, fun-loving. In the fifth house, which is the house of creativity and flirting, we see a great deal of fun. The moon in Sagittarius is extremely non-committal to the point of flirting just for the fun of it. This was not a serious relationship by any standards, but due to the strong Neptunian influence in the first house trine the moon, the woman, it is entirely possible that she was the one being deceived by the male partners. In a birth chart, the moon in Sagittarius denotes a person who has no filter and can blurt out things that may not be the most tactful or come at the most appropriate time. Here, the moon is representative of the emotional landscape of the woman, so Marilyn might have been the one whose discretion wasn't necessarily too strong or deemed trustworthy. I read that both Kennedy brothers were allegedly scared of Marilyn making political secrets public, but I'm not sure how much stock to put into that and whether they even discussed politics at all. But it has been noted that Marilyn did have strong political views. Venus is sexually forward and bold in Aries, and conjunct Mercury speaks of a strong sexual element that, opposite Saturn in Libra and square Pluto, could tend towards the competitive. There was possibly a sibling rivalry concerning who would catch the glamorous star first. With the T-square between Saturn, the Aries planets, and Pluto, I get the impression of a tense power struggle and easily wounded egos on all sides. With Pluto in the 12th house in the feminine sign Cancer, there's likely suppression of the feminine power involved. I also get the impression that she was welcome as long as she played along and was non-committal, but never as a legitimate partner who has her say, and this is something that completely goes against Marilyn's very nature. Mars in Aquarius is strongly motivated by social ideals, and opposite Neptune in Leo we get the classic looks can be deceiving dynamic and sexual interest derived from appearance and outward fascination. In other words, the Kennedys saw Marilyn as a trophy. I have looked into Marilyn's death too and examined the respective charts for Marilyn alone, as well as her composite charts with JFK and RFK and all three combined. I won't go into details now as this is worthy of its own separate treatment, but suffice it to say, if someone were to speculate about the high-profile brothers' alleged involvement in her demise, or Marilyn's relationship with them being the cause of someone else, let's say, intervening as a hidden hand, I wouldn't say that the astrology is against this idea. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and a comment if you did, and subscribe to my channel if you like my content. I make a new video every month and post regular updates in the community tab on my channel. I also do professional readings for individuals as well as relationship readings. You can find more information on my website along with all my other social media channels that you can follow. Until next time.